Alright, you guys, let's talk about Starfield, Xbox, and this whole conversation started. The whole frames per second conversation. I think it's been an ongoing thing for quite a while now, and it's starting to rear its ugly head. And I feel like there's a consistent switch up on some people based off of like sometimes they're saying 60 frames or nothing. Now a lot of people like to switch up and say 30 frames per second is okay. Personally, me myself, I don't care as long as it's stable. If it's 30 frames and it's stable, I'm fine. If it's 60 frames and stable, I'm fine. A couple dips here and there are to be expected. This is tech that we're talking about. It doesn't always run the way it's intended, the way we want it to run. But as long as it doesn't interfere with the immersion or the experience of the game, ultimately, I'm pretty cool with it. Now, I think it's just funny. Xbox in 2023, they can never have a moment in the sun. They can never have a moment where they're on top. Like, we as a gaming community would not allow Xbox fans to feel vindicated for their box, and it's kind of funny. Like, I feel for them because sometimes they like to hype up some of their games, and I feel like they're just yelling at an empty void sometimes. Like, we're not accepting it, we're not hearing it. And the biggest reason is because their message is consistently changing. They're not consistent with what they want. Anyways, that's a conversation for another day. Let's stick to the frames per second issue right now. So, Starfield, this big, awesome, amazing, explorative new Bethesda world that's going to be releasing sometime in September, is releasing without a 60 frames per second option. It's going to be running max 30 frames per second. We saw this back with Redfall and the backlash that caused. And I feel like my biggest issue with this, first things first, starting off, is that Phil Spencer himself at Kinda Funny said they're going to be very clear with their messaging going into Starfield, and there's going to be no doubt everyone's going to be very aware of it, of what the frames per second is going to be. Now, they had like a 40-minute presentation showing off everything that makes Starfield amazing, everything that makes Starfield great. Never once did they mention frames per second. It wasn't until shortly afterwards where Todd Howard came out and said publicly that the game will be running at 30 frames per second on console. Now, that to me looks like they're trying to make sure the conversation isn't on the frames per second. They're trying to make sure that the conversation is on the exploration of the game, on all these things you can do, all the like adventures you're gonna have, etc. The 1,000 planets, all these cool buzzwords, right? 1,000 planets, graphical fidelity, exploration, all these things that they know gamers like to hear, while excluding the things that we know we do not want to hear, like the frames per second. I feel like if they were more confident in the frames per second, we would have seen it fitted in somewhere in this long deep dive into the game. Like, I feel like that is such a thing that Xbox is getting criticized for, that they should have been more upfront. And I feel like if you're more upfront about it, I would have felt more confident that you feel confident in it. That's my number one issue, is the fact that it felt kind of like they were trying to hide it as best they can, while also still trying to stay true to that message of we're going to make sure it's clear. So I feel like for us, the more hardcore gamers that keep our ears to the ground, that know what's going on, we're going to hear about it. We're going to hear about the frames per second. The mainstream audience that probably only saw some trailers, maybe saw the more deep dive Starfield trailer, aren't going to know the frames per second and aren't even going to be thinking about the frames per second because they're so engulfed with this exploration. And then when they play the game, that's going to be their first time experiencing the frames. So that's my first issue with Starfield's frames. My second issue is that Xbox Series XS consoles have been out on the market for 3.5 years at this point. The only true experiences designed for this console are Redfall and Starfield so far. And both of those games are running at 30 frames per second on console. Both of those games are the first experiences into this new super powerful 30,000 teraflops or whatever the heck they want to say. this strongest beast of a machine of a home console, first two experiences are 30 frames per second. It's just not a good look. Now, I think a lot of people were hyperbolic with Redfall's frames per second. I feel like a lot of people were very upset about it when they heard it, and I think it was funny that when the reviews came out, a lot of people even said the frames don't even really matter in the game, that it doesn't detract from the experience. The game itself was just an issue, but the issue wasn't the frames in that one. So I feel like we're going to get a lot of that with Starfield. I feel like it's a conversation now because we haven't played the game, and I think a game that targets 30 frames per second and hits 30 frames per second consistently is a lot smoother than a game that targets 60 but can't really hit it all the time. That's more noticeable because you notice the moments when it's 60 and then it drops, and again, it ruins that immersion. So I think Starfield is going to target 30 and it's going to hit 30 consistently. So I don't think we're going to have an issue with how smooth Starfield is. So I don't even think that's going to be the conversation after the game releases. Again, I just think going into this newest generation, your big AAA blockbuster games should have been more forward facing. They should have been more concrete as to what people are going to be getting out of this box. And I feel like Redfall hopefully is not indicative of the future games, and Starfield damn well will not be indicative of their future games, because you only get one big open world Bethesda game like every couple years. They're not going to come out with Starfield 2 in this generation, We'll probably get Elder Scrolls somewhere down the line, but it's going to be, ways off till then. So again, these two games aren't going to be the games you're going to be playing consistently on Xbox Series X and S. And these are your first two specific tailor-made experiences for this console. I don't know. I feel like your first AAA blockbuster games on this new console should have been, again, just more indicative of the experience that the player is going to have on this box moving forward. So I just wish they were better examples. Like you look at the PlayStation 5, games like Ratchet and Clank, games like Returnal, that's not the full potential of the PS5. We all know this. But it is a good sample of what we're going to get, plus some. So it's only going up from here, essentially. Xbox Series X and S is showing us Redfall. We better damn well go up from Redfall. And as far as, Starfield goes, this is probably going to be the most expansive open world on this box. I don't really see them going any more expansive from this. So they're definitely going, really early on with showing this huge expansive world that again, it's just not indicative of their future projects. All right, let's talk. Why do they do this? Hardcore gamers hate games less than 60 frames per second. There's some PC players who won't play anything less than 120. And I get it when you've experienced 60, when you experience 120. When you've been playing games for an X amount of years, these are things you notice. Todd Howard specifically said that they're not going to be targeting more than 30 because it's going to ruin the fidelity of the game, essentially the graphical fidelity of the game. And I think a lot of people are very angry about this because they're saying, well, graphically, Starfield doesn't look like the most next-gen graphics in the world, that we've seen better games, etc., etc. So it's kind of one of those trade-offs where people are like, well, I probably would have rather an even uglier game for smoother gameplay. I get that. The most loud, the most vocal, hardcore gamer of us all, will trade the way the game looks in exchange for the way the game plays. But they're not marketing the game to us. The most hardcore gamer on Xbox that has Game Pass, they're going to play Starfield no problem. That's not the issue. They're trying to make this game look as appealing as possible to the casual. They want the casual to go out there and buy this box. That's the game plan. So when they say they want to focus in on making the game look better versus making the game run better, that's definitely going to be them trying to target in and close in on the more casual gamer, the gamer that they felt like haven't decided whether they're buying a PS5 or an Xbox Series X and S yet. That's their game plan. They're saying, hey, you buy this box, you sign up for Game Pass, and Starfield is going to be an expansive, beautiful world that you're going to be able to play for hours on end. So you rather buy our box than buy the PS5 and play Ratchet and Clank for 20 hours. You know what I'm saying? Like that again, I feel like that's the game plan, that's the strategy, is just targeting those people that don't have the box yet, targeting those people who care more about graphics. Do I think this is a smart choice? Not really. Honestly, I feel like, yeah, I think Todd Howard on this one went a little too expansive, a little bit too ambitious with his vision of this game. And I get it. When you're a visionary, when you're an artist, you want to go balls to the wall, as expensive as you probably can, do the biggest you can. Especially someone like Todd Howard, who's been making games for so long, that he's definitely at the point where he's trying to, still be innovative, still break the mold, still be kind of that person that he was. And I think back then it was earlier. It was easier because we're moving into new technology. The gaming was still trying to figure out what it was as far as like in a 3D landscape. And he was kind of one of those people really early on who figured out how to make really cool and engaging and explorative open worlds. But now we've seen so many other cool ways to innovate and explore maps that, how does someone like Todd Howard stay relevant within this marketplace? And he's always trying to be the bigger and badder games out there. So I get that his vision might have got the best of him, and his best way to kind of fulfill his vision for the game was to do 30 frames per second. So I'm not gonna knock the guy for that. Again, everyone working, not just Todd Howard, but everyone working on the team at Starfield are masters of their craft, and they're showing it very well within this game. I think it was definitely a team effort to say, hey, if we have to do 30, but it means we get a more explorative, more engaging world, we're gonna do it. And we won't really know if it paid off truly until we actually play the game. But just on the lead up into the game, I feel like maybe you shouldn't have been as ambitious. Maybe you can cut back. I mean, do we really need 1,000 planets? Like specifically 1,000 planets? I don't know. I think as someone who loves to play games and loves to play a bunch of different games throughout the year, 1,000 planets is so off-putting to me. It's something that I do not want to sit down and go through 1,000 planets of this game. Like, it's just not something that I want to do. And it begs the question: are all these 1,000 planets as full and engaging and interactive as every single one? There's bound to be issues in different planets. There's bound to be glitches and bugs, and I don't know. I feel like had they just narrowed their focus a little bit more. I mean, like 500 planets sounds plenty. Maybe they could have hit 60 frames, hit their graphical fidelity. 500 planets still sounds amazing. I think their problem is when people look at this game, they want to compare it to No Man's Sky, and No Man's Sky has the 1,000 planet thing, so you can't go less than that. So you have to do that or more. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of moving factors and decisions as to why they did what they did. Ultimately, they're living out their vision, and they seem happy with the fact that it's gonna be able to be played at 30 frames per second. And again, they're happy with releasing at that. I'm happy for them. Hey, I'm not in game development, so I can't speak for them, and I will never ever try to say I know more than a game dev. Just as a consumer looking in, it is a little jarring for someone who would rather play a better, smoother experience than have 1,000 planets, than have these interactive sandwich thing going on. Those are things that, to me, I feel like are really easily marketable to more of a mainstream audience. And I get it, you gotta get the bag, you gotta target in somewhere. Just me, as someone who primarily plays on like PlayStation 5, it doesn't make me want to jump into this one day one. Ultimately, I don't think 30 frames per second ruins any game. I don't think it's going to be a deal breaker for Starfield. I do think they would have had better PR had they managed to hit their 60 and maybe narrow their ambition. But overall, that's not going to be the deal breaker in this game. And I feel like as long as the gameplay is good, as long as the story is pretty cool, as long as there's things to do and the world delivers on its exploration, there isn't going to be an issue with 30 frames per second. I mean, if we look back at Redfall, again, the biggest issue going into it was the 30 frames per second. But after the game released, after the reviews came out, 30 frames per second was not the conversation. Most people were like, hey, the 30 frames per second isn't even really that big a deal. The issue was the game sucked from a gameplay standpoint, from a story standpoint. The world was boring and dull. The objectives were just not there. Again, I feel like Starfield, the team behind there, are confident in their game. They know they're delivering something pretty cool and pretty amazing. And again, I don't think the 30 frames per second ruins that game. I don't think it ruins any game in general. But I think these game devs do need to learn that the gamer, the more mainstream gamer, is also starting to become some more of the hardcore gamer. It's starting to blend. Gaming is growing as an industry, and there's consistently people going into it every year. And a lot of us are getting smarter, and we're not really gonna be enjoying something like 30 frames per second in exchange for graphical fidelity anymore. It's not something that going into our like later on in this current generation, I don't think people are gonna be as happy with. So I feel like people like Xbox, PlayStation, even Nintendo is going to have to figure something out, because we're just not going to be okay with it. And unless you're making a crazy fun game like Tears of the Kingdom, people aren't going to like to settle down and play a choppy, framey game like Redfall. Overall, man, those are my final thoughts. Ran a little longer than I expected. Do me a favor and like the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, as it does help me out tons. With that, I'll catch you guys on the next video.